Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Management Musers. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about stress.
Oh, yeah.
Our old friend.
Good old friend stress. We'll start with the story. As you may know, if you've listened for a while, I'm a ski diva. I love me some snow skiing in the winter. It's the only source of friction in our marriage because I didn't come to snow skiing until late after we'd already been married for a while. And Cindy does not like the cold.
I fled.
She fled New England.
Yes, I fled.
Yep. And so I was in California skiing at Kirkwood. And Kirkwood has some places that are pretty barren at the top. And on the particular day I was there hadn't been a lot of snow. So in addition to no trees and a ton of wind, it was actually icy. And this was causing me great stress and not doing a whole lot for my ski performance
right now.
And I get to the top of one of these mountains and you have to ski down, you have to ski across it for a little ways because the first few feet are cliffs. And as I start making my way down, basically skiing across to the easy part so I can drop in or go into this easier part, there's this dude and he's leaning against the ski poles. And as I get closer, it becomes evident that he's smoking himself a little of that California, let's just say it was a California adult cigarette. And so he had himself a little reefer. And as I ski by, he takes his last few pulls on his reefer and sets it in his ski pocket. It was a kind of electronic deal, you know, like a vaping deal, right? Mm. And he kind of stretches himself a little with his shoulders, and then he drops right over the cliff. And I stopped because like nobody all day had gone over. And least of all, somebody who just been smoking reefer, gone over this cliff. And so I stop and kind of gently get my way to the cliff, and he's down it, no problem, and just skiing along like there's nothing wrong. And that's the first thing that we want to talk about.
Is how there is a myth about stress.
Yeah.
That a little bit of stress actually improves performance, and it's a widespread myth that
if you don't have enough stress, you're not going to perform well.
Right. And, you know, one study found that. And, but nobody else, to the best of our knowledge, has.
Yeah. And it's countered by, so that conventional wisdom that if you don't have enough stress.
Yeah. Like there's a, like, they kind of say like a middle level of stress, right? Yeah. Like you need some stress, but then you can get too stressed and then it's no good. Well, there's really no evidence for even the middle level. Like people actually, they don't do well, or they don't do as well under stress. And if you think about like the best Olympic performances, the people who really nail it are the people who go out there and they look like they are having a great time.
But it goes back to this idea of expertise, where if you develop expertise in something, usually that's grueling. And so a surgeon, learning to be a surgeon, that's grueling. A downhill skier learning how to be a skier, that's grueling. An Olympic hurdler learning the hurdles, that's grueling. But then when you're actually doing the thing,
you know how to do it.
Yeah, and all of the...
And it should feel pretty good while doing it because your body has been built to be capable of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you could see where the conventional wisdom would kind of took hold, where you think about, oh, well, I don't have enough stress. Yeah, I'm kind of drifting. I'm not at my best. But that's a very particular kind of low stress. That's boredom. And
well, or procrastination.
Could be. Could be, you think? So people aren't stressed when they're procrastinating?
No, they are. But that's the reason why they're not. there's a point with procrastination where like you're like, oh, the deadline is looming and I have to get it done, right? You're still
right.
It doesn't mean that you're actually at your best performance because you're getting it done. Like you weren't getting it done before, but now you're getting it done because you have this deadline looming. But that's just stress that's getting you to get it done. That's not stress that's enhancing your performance.
Oh, so you think, well, so that's an interesting conversation because are you pro-deadline or anti-deadline?
I'm pro-deadline, but because I think that otherwise time flies. I think I know I'm particularly bad at this, but I think a lot of people are bad with keeping time in their head. And I think otherwise, without deadlines, like the whole year goes by and you've got nothing done.
So are we saying we're starting this discussion on stress with a little myth busting that the most recent research suggests that there's no link between having stress or there's no improving performance.
Right.
The link is the other way.
Right.
That generally stress degrades or impedes performance.
Right.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I'm adding to it, because I think this is sort of why the myth caught on, is that, as just a stress anxiety reaction, a lot of people procrastinate and then they need that last minute deadline to just finally say,
to actually do something.
Screw it.
Right.
But that's when like they're at the highest stress. And that can be true and still mean they're not giving their best performance.
Right. Yeah. That it's actually, in that instance, the deadline is jolting
them to just do something.
Right. Lord, yeah. Heaven knows I can think of many times in my life when...
Yeah, I mean, there's the thing is that underlying procrastination usually is like a fear that you're not going to be able to get this thing done, either because you don't have all the tools or you don't necessarily feel like you have all the skills or you just don't even really know what they're asking you for.
Yeah.
And so everybody has like times where they've procrastinated.
Yeah. All right. So we're saying to kind of roll out a couple manager lessons from this.
Deadline's good. We're not opposed to deadlines.
Yeah, because, I mean, deadlines can spur action, but they're also, deadlines often serve not just to spur action so people stop messing around and get it done. They're actually just planning. They're for milestones.
Right.
All right, we're going to do this by this, and then this by this. And
right, and they help other people coordinate, which is absolutely critical in an organization. If people don't know when you're going to get your stuff done, then they don't know when they have to get their stuff done.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily the case that all deadlines create stress.
No, if you're not procrastinating, a deadline is just actually a very helpful tool. Like, okay, I got to get this done.
Yeah.
I'll work on it next week.
So, one, there's no clear data that a little stress improves performance. We think that any stress actually tends to degrade performance. Two, you can recognize that relationship is true, but still be pro-deadline. For actually spurring, getting it done, and also as a coordinating and planning mechanism.
Right.
Those are the two things so far that we pulled out of this. It reminds me of this discussion reminds me many years ago, and we'll put a link to it if I can find it. I think it's widely available online, but it's the Malcolm Gladwell article where he distinguishes panic from choking. But he talks about basically panic is when you're asked to do something that you don't know how to do. And choking is when you're asked to do something you do know how to do, but you can't access it.
And that's usually because of stress.
Yes.
Right. And so that totally, now they would say previously that was like a high level of stress. But when you're under stress, you're in the old part of the brain. You're in the lizard brain. And so you're not working to your best. Yeah.
Well, you have that. Yeah, you have that signal.
Right.
Like, I've got to get this done. I'm not going to be able to do this. It reminds me of the Samaritan study. I forget who did it, but in seminary school, they did it with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And they basically set the students up. They taught them the Good Samaritan parable all day long, where people were passing the person asking for help in the street, and then the Samaritan stopped and rendered aid. So it's called the Good Samaritan. So they teach them this parable all day long, and toward the end of the class at seminary, which is preacher school, they say, hey, you need to, there's the church down the street, the preacher got called away for somebody's in the hospital, and so they need somebody to cover the service tonight. You can preach whatever you want, it doesn't matter, just do we have any volunteers? Of course the whole room volunteers because there would be preachers, and now here's an opportunity to preach down the street to church. And so in all the cases they tell them, you're good, you go down the street and you can just take this material we've been talking about all day and just preach from that. It's fresh in your mind, we've been talking about the Good Samaritan, go preach on that, here's what you read, here's the stories, hum. And in half of the cases, they told the people, hey, you got plenty of time, don't worry, it's just up the street. Service starts in 20 minutes. It'll only take you about 10 minutes to get there. You're good to go. And in the other half, they tell them, hey, you got to hurry because this thing starts in 10 minutes and it's going to take you about 15 minutes to get there. And so you're basically going to be late. And in all of the cases, they position an actor in the street begging for help. And of the preachers who've been told that they had the spare 10 minutes, now bear in mind, these preachers, after all day about hearing about the Good Samaritan, going to preach about the topic, virtually all of those preachers who felt like they had a little time stopped. And virtually none of the preachers who felt like they were in a time crunch stopped. And so it's this example of, we're talking about, and I think you would call it an intervening variable, stress, that gets in the way of us doing a thing. Whether that thing is feeling like I can stop and help somebody in the street who's begging me for my help, or whether I can complete this project, complete this report, whatever the case may be. All right, so far, not clear that a little bit of stress is good for performance. Pretty clear that stress impedes performance. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean, though, that we can't still be pro-deadline for the reasons we talked about. Then third thing, we spend a lot of time where stress is involved, us in our work, stopping and preventing people from puffing up to stress and anxiety so that it's bigger than it actually is. One of our favorite things that we almost always do is a lot of times people will say to us, and we've actually had people say this, everybody's, what do they say?
They're all terrible workers.
They're all terrible workers.
And then you're like,
count
okay,
them. Name them.
We need a list.
Name them. This is in one-on-one.
Yeah, this is on one-on-one.
Yeah, name them. Name all of them.
And they'll have
how many is it?
One or two people.
Yeah, always.
They're just occupying their whole head.
Always. We'll do the same thing. I'm thinking of a group of about 20 people, and they were talking about a particular type of workers in their organization. And they were like, all of these people, of which it was about another group of about 20, 25. They're like, all these people, they don't want to work, and they're always asking stupid questions. And so we're like, all right, take a little note card and write down all of these types of workers you have in your organization who don't want to do the job, who are always doing the things you say, look, they're all doing this. And same thing. It was like 3 out of 25. And even with people writing, hey, just write as many as you want on a note card. And it's basically 3. And so we always, when we hear words like everyone, all the time, constantly, things that are absolute words, it's usually our cue. That's usually a signal that people are puffing up.
Right. And I think that you have to be careful about the high dramatic people.
No.
Because the high dramatic people in an organization are running around, making you feel like there's always a disaster that's happening. And at some point you have to figure out how to weight that differently.
And so yeah, I guess we should talk about the distribution of stress sensitivity, where you think of a bell curve. So think of a curve, like an upside down U, but like looks like this, a bell curve.
Or a mountain.
Yeah, mountain. And most people have a normal stress sensitivity. They're able to handle challenges without flipping out, but at a certain level, almost everybody flips out. Mm-hmm. And then there's a small number of people, and they have a low stress sensitivity. I think of Matthew McConaughey. I think of his first character where he shot to fame in Dazed and Confused, where he's all right, all right, all right. And I actually think that's what he's like. And that's an example of somebody who I would say that's a low stress sensitivity. If you're old enough to remember Bill Murray, I think Bill Murray, the actor, is low stress sensitivity, just as another example.
Again, a guess.
Yeah, just a guess. And then there are people on the other side that they're high stress sensitivity, and they get worked up over almost everything. And I think that's some of the people you're talking about. Not, we could argue about, is there a difference between high stress sensitivity and high drama? But I think there's a decent amount of overlap where you've got people and they get worked up over almost everything. And then the third is expertise. And that in general, in the areas in our life where we paid for in blood, sweat, and tears expertise, we're able to handle
a whole variety, yeah. Hello, musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
We'll talk about some of Cindy's surveys. She can measure anything. What does she measure a lot of? Culture, communication flows, influence, satisfaction, engagement, turnover. Those are some of the big ones.
Those are.
If you want to know how is my company doing, get baseline measures and then get either quarterly or annual reassessments. Cindy is your woman, and she has the tools. She built the tools. We own the tools. And so it's easy for us to add sections, remove sections, move things around based on exactly what you need to get
right.
measured.
Often I have like a conversation with the CEO about the problems that they think they're having. And then we do some customization.
Yep, we did that. I did that on Friday. I got to tell you what they need at the place I was Friday.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're doing their next one, and there's some things that they want to measure this year that they didn't measure last year, things that have come up.
Yeah, and that happens. Like as you fix
normal,
as you maybe make headway on one thing, something else gets loose. So.
Some comes up.
Yeah.
Some goes out. Some goes in. Culsure. Culsure. C-U-L-S-U-R-E. Culsure.com. That's Cindy's company. She can measure anything. Check it out. Give her a call, and she'll get you straight. I'll tell this story. So we're in this fancy place. This was after I finished my book and Cindy had finished her dissertation.
Yeah.
And so we hadn't taken vacation a long time. And so we built up a money pot and in our little vacation fund. And so we decided to visit the one island we've never been in Hawaii, which was Lanai. So we're at the Four Seasons. We're in the pool. It's got a hot tub detached away from the pool, but you can see the pool. And we meet a couple people in the medical field, physician's assistants, PAs. And so they're basically in between nurse and doctor, I guess is a way of saying it. They're called advanced practice professionals. But basically they're kind of like a doctor's assistant is a good way of saying it. Physician's assistant, but in a lot of places they can, under a doctor's supervision, they can actually prescribe medicine and all this kind of business. They see patients.
And in some places I think they can, like I think New Mexico, they can do it without that.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, without a doctor. I know the nurses can, the nurse practitioners. Anyway, a little bit of inside baseball there for all you healthcare folks. And so we're sitting there talking shop with some of the, with these two PAs, a husband and wife pair, who are over from another island for the weekend and just shooting the breeze, having a good time. Eventually they get up and they leave the hot tub and the pool area because I think they're going to head into dinner, get ready for dinner or whatever. And it's just Cindy and and I'm in the pool as well. And so it's us in the pool and in the hot tub, I should say. And there's a group of about 3, maybe 4 people in the pool, and they've been hitting the pina coladas pretty hard.
We actually saw one of them dive into a really, well, like a pond in its natural state.
Yeah.
Like when we were walking the grounds before the hot tub, and I was like, they have to be so drunk to be putting their body in there.
And so they're in there in the pool.
And they come up and they're like, hey, you want to have a swim contest?
Yep, to me in the hot tub. And I'm like, I can't believe it. Here I am, this fancy place. I got my wife. We're in the hot tub and these drunk guys. And so, of course, I say, I certainly do.
And so the swim contest.
Yep, so I get up to go to the swim contest.
But we got to tell them that the swim contest is swimming underwater for as long as you can.
Yep.
And so.
Yeah. So the dude's buddy, the dude who had originally jumped into the duck pond, his buddy goes first. And he goes.
It's his cousin, I think, actually.
He goes down and back and down. And then he comes up for air. And so he's put his marker
Which,
in.
I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Pretty decent?
Yeah, to go
now,
2 lengths in the pool underwater.
Yeah. And so I get in, and I go down and back and down and back. So now I'm in the lead. And I come up. And now the guy who jumped in the duck pond, he gets in, and he goes down and back and down and back and down. And then he comes up for air, so he's won. So his buddy starts wandering off because he knows he's lost. And
I'm in the hot tub. I see him come up.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, all's good. I was getting, he was starting to swim funny at the end. He was like starting to like kind of swim kind of crooked. And I mean, that happens like if you don't have your eyes open. So I wasn't extraordinarily concerned, but I saw him come up.
Yep. And then, so Cindy kind of turns away. His buddies turned away. I start to walk away out of the pool. I was going to hang around and tell him congratulations, but he comes up and then he starts going back down again.
And he's kind of doing a dead man's float.
Well, it was something weird about the way he went back down, and it took a couple, seconds, seemed like, and then it dawned on me, oh crap, he's drowning. And so back to this idea about whether you have expertise or not. And so I have, years ago, I took a lifeguard class. And so I knew just enough to basically know I got to get in there. I got to get him out of this pool. He's definitely at the bottom of the pool. This is not going to be good. And so I race in the pool. I grab him by under the armpits. And then I pull him forward and pull him, and there's steps in the pool. So I'm pulling him like this, and I'm basically panicking. And on the way up, I hit his head, boom, 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 on the steps. And then I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? I get him out of the pool, I flip him over, and his head goes crack on the back. And I'm like, and that was enough for me to realize I do not know what I'm doing.
I've run to go I've gone to the little shed to call 911.
And so I flip out. I got the guy out of the pool. He's looking the wrong color.
Yeah, he's gray.
Yep. And I don't know what to do. And so I like, what am I going to do? And it hits me because there's nobody around. Cindy's gone to the phone for 911 in the shed. And I'm like, wait, the PAs. And so I run into the lobby of the Four Seasons, which is, so many feet away from this pool. Run in there, and I'm just screaming, PAs, PAs, somebody's drowning, PAs, PAs. And so by then, I didn't know. But first of all, if you ever run into a Four Seasons screaming about somebody drowning, that definitely gets their attention. And so the lobby of this Four Seasons just empties out to the pool for people going to help. By then, it was the PAs who'd come back around.
I thought it was a chiropractor who stepped in.
Yeah, so some older dude comes around,
turns him on his side and slapping the daylights out of his back.
Walks up to this dead dude, basically. This chiropractor walks up, turns him over, sets his head down, or turns him over to his
on his side. He's on his side. He starts wailing on his back.
Bam, bam.
So much from mouth to mouth.
The dude goes, and by then I'm back to this dude. The chiropractor's there. He's like, okay, yeah, we got his airway open. And I look at the drown guy, and he looks at me, and he's like, did I win? And I said, yeah, man. Yeah, you won. And he's like, oh, for some reason, my head is killing me.
He's got like huge knogs like on his forehead. And there's one on the back too.
I did on accident to the guy. And so I'm like, oh, your headache. Dude, I think that may have been the pina coladas. And he's like, well, yeah, could have been. And that is a great example of the kind of third intervening variable between stress and performance,
which is expertise.
Where I did not know what to do. Once I got the guy out of the pool, no idea. Didn't know. And so I panicked. Meanwhile, the PAs, had I been able to get them, would have been fine. And this chiropractor, who whatever his background was in training or whatever.
But just knowing how the body works, yeah.
Yeah. And he knew, oh, I just got to get the water out of this dude's lungs or whatever. And banged on him. The guy coughed up the water, and he was back in business, just like that. Mm. Let's do some learning points then from this. We started this part of the conversation talking about puffing up anxiety. Mm-hmm. And that there are some people, and they're more stress sensitive, and they're more likely to puff up the stress in a situation. And that can be contagious. It's definitely contagious. It took us many years of doing facilitation work before we realized that when people said everyone and all, they usually mean two people. And for us to reflexively unwind that.
Well, and I think that that's an important lesson for managers too, because, it's oftentimes one or two people who are coming to you telling you what a disaster the place is. And, you have to consider it. Like, you have to look around and consider it, but it's two people, and yet their whole perception will be tainted to believe that the place is falling apart. I see it when I give surveys. Most of the time they're like, oh yeah, this totally jives with like what we kind of thought. But then there will be like a couple people who are like, I'm really surprised we did this well. And it's because they've had one or two people chew in their ear about how bad the place is, and making them believe that everybody's unhappy, when in reality it's, 5%.
So, all right. So that's it. 3 things that we know of in this block that we talked about that intervene. Individual differences. Can't do anything about that. Like Lady Gaga, you're born that way. Time urgency, feeling time poor. Generally speaking, when people don't feel like they have enough time to do what they need to do, it degrades their performance. They take the shortcuts that we talked about, usually not for the better. And then expertise. In the parts of my life where I've bled and sweat for expertise and knowledge, usually I can handle more stress. Which brings us to the very interesting notion from Judson Brewer that all habits are actually covering for a stressor or an anxiety. And so it's kind of trippy. Cindy's going to walk us through an example of this. But this idea is a very interesting parlor game to play for yourself. Can you think of any habit that you do? And can you trace that habit back to an underlying stress or anxiety? And so Cindy will walk us through one, and then we'll talk a little bit about this.
So, I had a great dad.
Yep.
But
I'll agree with that.
Yeah, he was a great dad. But from my earliest memories, he was always warning me that he was going to die young, because his dad had died young. And I was a surprise. And so my dad was older
the baby.
Yeah. I was the baby in the family. So I wasn't planned for, but they were already married. And so I have 3 older siblings. And so he was older than he would have liked to have been to have a child, because he had in his head that he was going to die at 49, which is when his dad died. And so I was always being prepared for that. And then, you know, in high school, freshman year, he had a stroke. He bounced back from that. And then...
how old was he when he had that first stroke?
Well, I think he probably would have been around 52.
Okay.
So he had actually gone past my grandfather, but it's weird in my family. If you go down to the cemetery, it's like between like 49 and 54, like basically something gets them. Anyway, just weird. But, so he was always worried about that. He probably would have checked out at that point if it wasn't for modern medicine. And so he had that. And then at 67, he had his second stroke, which left him bedridden. And so, you know, I'd always been involved in sports, and I loved activities. I used to be in gymnastics and absolutely loved it. Loved the feel of the body moving. And so I wasn't completely without it, but certainly seeing my dad bedridden, and my dad was somebody who was very active, had an impact on me, where I started basically every single day, I must move. And you know, people would consider that exercise. I kind of think about it as movement, because it's not that I necessarily stress myself, although sometimes I'm bored down there, so I'll give it a little bit more cardio. I'm actually just down there enjoying myself. But that's what built the habit. Is, you know, I experimented. I had like a couple of days where I would take off and rest my body, because that's what everybody tells you to do. And then I wouldn't pick it up as fast. And so I just started doing it every single day. And now, you know, and built that habit. And behind that habit is the fear that, you know, my body will work against me like it did my dad.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah. And so it's a very interesting notion. We'll put, again, in the show notes, links to reference and everything. But there's credible research that almost every habit forms as a response to stress or anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so basically, Cindy's worrying about dying young. That's what is getting her. That's where the habit was built for her going to the gym.
So my habit's really about like trying to preserve quality of life, or it's not lifespan, but health span.
Health span. Yeah. They talk about the difference between how long you live or how long do you live well.
And you know, quite frankly, the research is lining up on exercise's side. So
is what?
The exercise is lining up on exercise's side. If you want health span.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So this parlor game is now, can you pick almost anything that's a habit, and can you find an anxiety?
And so it could be checking email. It could be social media. It could be eating. It could be getting in your car and driving.
Yeah.
For no reason. Think more broadly than just like addiction. Think about like the things that you do in like your daily life.
Can be even good stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
I think the exercise became a good habit, right? Yeah. Like I'm not actually damaging my body with exercising. I'm doing it at a very comfortable level.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel great.
Yeah.
In fact, I hate it when I don't get it in.
Check my email all the time. Why do I check my email?
Right. Or like things that you do that really, you do them frequently, but they don't really, they're a distraction. Right.
Yeah. Like constantly on the email. That's an anxiety of, am I going to miss something?
FOMO.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That basically, from our discussion, fear of missing out is entirely anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was also thinking about social media. People who are on social media a lot.
Oh, for sure.
Habit. You think there's an anxiety under that?
Yes.
You think it's a social comparison? something else?
It could be that they're just, so the trigger might be something else. And this is just the distraction that's rewarding.
Yeah.
And so,
okay.
The trigger could be, I'm not sure how to get my project done.
Right.
So I'm just going to take a little break and think about it. And I'm going over to social media to do it. And then it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
Every time you don't know how to do something, you're checking social media.
Yeah. And Cindy's point is a good one. There's a big difference between a break and a habit. And so we're pro break generally. The right kind of breaks. You get up, you walk around, you clear your head, get a little something to eat.
Maybe stretch.
Yeah. And I mean, we wouldn't be terribly opposed to, surfing the internet a little bit for a break. But remember, you're still using your brain when you're doing that. You're still making a bunch of choices. Do I click here? Do I read this? And so it's not really a great break.
And it also has the potential to
be a habit. Yeah, the habit's the problem.
It's got the random payout, which puts a high reward value on it.
Yeah.
And if it has a high reward value, then it's likely to become a habit.
Yeah.
Hello, musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
A little bit about coaching. Look, coaching is very easy to explain. Sometimes something's going on and you need a second opinion to think your way through it. We do that. Sometimes you're just looking to find another gear. We do that. Sometimes you're looking to put a handful of your executives through a program. We do that. Usually coaching meets, depending on what's going on, every month to once every 2 months. You do it for a year. We'll do a 360 assessment where you get feedback before and after if you want it. And we'll help you pick something that you either want to make your way through, or meaning you've got something going on, it's a new, you just got promoted and you want a little help getting off to a good start in the first year, or you got a new boss and things aren't going great and you want your help navigating that. We can do that. That's kind of more the emergent stuff or the developmental stuff. Mm-hmm. You've been in the job for a while, nothing crazy's going on, just a normal craziness, but you're trying to, like I said, find another gear, be a little more effective and productive.
Yeah, maybe start to shape yourself for the next position.
Yeah, start thinking about what comes next, what's the next push. A lot of times we help people think through what's kind of the 2 or 3 year push. What's this next push that I'm going to be doing? Where's that going to take me? What do I want to focus on? All that's through coaching. You can learn more about our coaching at ondemandleadership.com. ondemandleadership.com for coaching. You'll like it. We have people that we coach for many, many years. A lot of people will go in and out. We'll get them straight for a phase.
And then they'll come back.
Yep. Know what their phase is, and then they kind of go off and execute, and then they come back.
Yeah. I consider us potentially high payoff, low cost, in terms of social cost, because the conversations are just between us.
Yep.
And so, you can admit to things and say things that maybe you wouldn't to somebody in your organization. Yeah,
that's a good point. We are confidential coaches. So if you're a CEO hiring us for your people, we're not going to tell you which people are saying. But nobody ever really asks.
No.
Yeah, they kind of know.
Yeah.
It's people we work with, we're lucky. They basically just want
They want their people to be better.
Employees. Yeah.
They want their people to have the support they need.
Yep. Call us on ondemandleadership.com, ondemandleadership.com. So what are we saying for managers about this parlor game? The parlor game is many, many, many habits, maybe all, have an underlying anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so what does that mean for managers?
Well, if you're getting yourself together, you might think about the ways that your habits are causing you to maybe not be as productive.
Yeah, or even...
And it doesn't even have to be work productive. I mean, I think you're also probably avoiding things that, anything that winds up stressing you out, you wind up going and doing this thing that you picked up the habit on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're, I think, into this idea about we are not recommending stress-free workplaces because that's preposterous.
Yeah, you just can't.
Yeah. But we are shedding light on research that suggests stress does not help performance. Stress actually hurts performance. And so how do we help people? How do we help managers and people who aren't managing but trying to show up and do their best every day? How do we help people manage the anxiety and stress that they face? And so let's talk about some of those ideas.
So I think you do have to unwind habits once they've been built. But I think if you start thinking about work in terms of likely triggers, which are, they're fear-based, like fear of uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen, and so I'm going to do this other thing, or fear, or along with uncertainty, I don't know what's expected of me, so I'm going to go and do this other thing. But there's also the fear of failure that I think plays a big role at work. Well, once you realize that that's oftentimes the trigger to creating these wasteful habits, I think we need to be more proactive in organizations about helping the people who are under us to be able to get the training, get the resources, get the support that they need. And I think what we see a lot of the time is people are like, well, I have this open door policy, but you're asking somebody to admit that they are basically drowning and walk through the door, when it probably, and while they're drowning in this uncertainty, they're probably building a habit that is eventually going to have to be unwound.
Yeah.
Versus actually doing a little bit of investigation and making sure, are they actually making progress on this thing?
Yeah.
And do they need feedback that it's actually seems like it's going in the right direction? And so I think there are some things that we could do as leaders in organizations to help the people under us resolve some of this fear of uncertainty and fear of failure. Fear of uncertainty is never going to go away for the most upper levels of organizations, because you're dealing in environments that are changing in ways that are not entirely predictable.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's the idea of, it goes by a lot of names, but this idea of management by walking around, or in healthcare, they call it rounding, where a percentage of your time as a manager is you're actually making yourself accessible. I know a lot of people listening to this podcast, they're managing people who are off-site, remote. But that idea of basically, do we have a mechanism in place where periodically, once every couple weeks, you, the manager, can ask the people who report to you, how can I help? What can I do today to help you? What's the most important thing that you're working on, and how can I help? And that makes it easier to respond to that than to have a theoretical open door policy.
Well, and to have a difficult conversation of why you didn't get it done, right? After the fact. So I think in some ways you're getting ahead of problems with having those conversations.
This is the nature of knowledge work. There isn't a playbook for a lot of stuff. If you're listening to this podcast, there's probably not a playbook for your job. You just got to figure stuff out. And if you have to figure stuff out, then there's a lot of times where you don't know what's going on. I mean, we spend a percentage of our day-to-day lives coaching senior executives, and they don't know what's going on. It's a gamble. It's a guess. Their industries are changing.
At those levels, you have to get comfortable with uncertainty. Yeah. But part of that is identifying the habits that you do build based on stress and anxiety, and unwinding them. Yeah.
So let's kind of roll everything up now. So this conversation started by us talking about increasing research suggests that stress at almost any level impedes performance. Doesn't mean you can't do stuff. when there's stress, but that it's actually...
You'll probably get better at it when
Yeah.
when there's not the stress associated with it.
Yeah. And so that leads us into creating organizations where the barriers are lower to asking for help, to where it's easier to say when you don't know how to do something and get the resources, support, education, training, whatever it is that you need. And it requires managers more actively trying to eliminate the barriers to that honesty, so that we're able to, as many of us work in, knowledge intensive organizations, service intensive, knowledge intensive, a lot of the things that we're trying to do haven't been done. And there isn't a playbook for some of the highest value add work that we're doing. And that's why we wanted to have this discussion today about stress and encourage managers to try to build the kind of organizations where people feel like they're able to relax more into the very challenging work. Like, go back to the metaphor. Just take out my metaphor about the guy in the skiing. Just take out the reefer, because we're not recommending that.
Well, no, that might get you fired.
Yeah, but we're recommending that kind of relaxation before you drop into the cliff.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's like, I'm going to be fine. I'll figure this out. Here I go.
And on that note, because as we've said previously, leadership lives in a world of uncertainty. And so, yes, you can be better at it than most people, but you're still probably going to have like these habits that you form as a reaction to it. And so, and just in general, regret is backward looking, anxiety is forward looking. And so anxiety and stress forward looking. And so you need tools when you're in it, because you will be in it.
In what? Anxiety?
Anxiety, stress,
Yeah.
build habits.
Yeah.
To basically bring yourself back into the present so
Right.
you can perform.
Right. So you're not looking back in regret, getting yanked out of the present. You're not looking forward in anxiety, getting yanked out of the
You're
present.
actually in the present.
Doing the work.
So that way you can do the work.
Yeah.
And
That's a good point.
And so that's where some of these tools can come in handy.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the things that people normally do to stay centered and relax, things that we've talked about before in a lot of different sessions.
Well,
Grounding
certainly
techniques.
Yeah. Yes. And just even like taking a minute and even noting for a few minutes everything that your five senses, your brain, everything in your physical environment that you're noticing.
Yeah. Because it brings you back to the present.
Right. And so like, sometimes and by the way, it's a muscle that you build. And so I talked earlier about exercise and how I love the way that it makes me feel. Well, I started noticing that as a kid, and I now have a very strong muscle where at any time I sort of just check internally and I note how different parts of my body are feeling.
Yeah.
And what's dominating. But you can do the same thing with like walking around outside. This is one thing Geoff is good at. I'm not so good at, because like I'm very goal oriented. So I have the goal and then I don't see anything else around me. Geoff always sees the pretty flowers. He always hears the birds. And so I'm now actively building that muscle. I go on walks and my brain gets like into like the goal and where I need to be in the future. And I'm trying to periodically pull myself out and acknowledge the birds that I hear, the flowers that I see, the pretty graffitis on the wall. So that way I start to build that muscle, because I have the internal one.
Yeah.
And those are things that you can do to move yourself out of the past, out of the future, and back into the present.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think we probably need to wrap it up.
All right. and say we've done enough. Thanks for listening today to our discussion on stress with a little bit of anxiety thrown in. No extra charge for that.
Mm-hmm. A little bit of habit thrown in.
A little bit.
So
yeah,
if
we
you want to hear
talk
more
a little bit about expertise too.
A little bit. So we've talked about a little bit of everything. We do have an episode on habits. That will be part of this season.
Yep. So you can go to the habit episode if you want to go a little bit deeper on some of these adjacent ideas. All right. Good luck in the organizations that you're building and the people that you're leading and managing. And on that note, talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to the next time.
Yep.
Thanks again for joining us on the Management Muse. We appreciate likes, stars, downloads, shares, and subscriptions. For more information on the resources that help us generate this content, check out the reference material in our show notes. Special thanks to Rebecca Henley, Abby Ariano, and Ariel Villafane. Thank you. See you next time.